Hi, Lisa. Welcome. We're just going to wait until about 5 minutes after the hour to get started in case people are still coming in from the last event, maybe needed a bio break, anything like that. So we'll start in just a couple minutes. All right, it is 3:05. So I'm going to get started. I know we are doing a recording and I have a lot that I want to go over. So I will welcome your questions at any point in time. If it's something that I will get to later, then I will be sure to let you know, like I'm getting to that. And if not, I'll do my best to give you an answer. Really happy to connect with anybody after this as well. So my name is Dr. Laura Gallaher, and I'm going to talk today about the missing link to evolve your culture. So what are we doing today? So there's a few things on my agenda. First, we're going to talk about how do you know if your culture is misaligned, right? What does that look like? What are those pain points? They'll probably sound at least a little familiar to you, at least some of them. Then we're going to talk about how important is culture really? What do we know about it? What has research taught us about how important culture is? I'm then going to share culture and NASA. So I actually began my career working for NASA at Kennedy Space Center. And I want to share what we learned about the work there. I was there about 7.5, 8 years. And so I'm excited to share with you what we learned through that work and how we bring that to other clients and how you can use that specifically. Like, how do you actually evolve your culture? I'm going to present to you a model today that I think will really bring some resonance to what makes culture kind of tricky. And then we're going to do this deep dive into one of the most important elements that actually creates amazing culture, which is openness. So I'm going to define what that is, and I'm going to actually teach you how you can implement that. And that's that pragmatic game changer for effective results. All right, so what does it feel like when your culture isn't aligned? So here are some of the most common things that we hear. I fear my leaders are not the right people to take this organization to the next level, right? Especially in tech, we have so many organizations that are growing so quickly. And so it's often like looking at the people that you have now and going, man, are these the right people to get me where I want to go? Sometimes that becomes a really powerful and important question. Maybe it's people in my organization are avoiding difficult conversations. Maybe it's you are avoiding difficult conversations. It's a very human thing, actually, for us to avoid difficult conversations and wildly destructive to what we really want in organizations, which is having those conversations, working through healthy conflict. as we grow, I notice more finger pointing and blame when things go wrong. So instead of it feeling really collaborative, feeling like, well, let's just figure out what happened and work together, it starts to be, marketing and sales pointing the finger at one another, or technology and product pointing the finger at each other when things go wrong. It could also be that it just feels like it takes a ton of energy to get things done. I used to hear things a lot from my clients like, man, it felt so much easier when we were just like 5 guys in a garage working on stuff. Now we've got, 30 or 50 people and everything's moving so much slower. Like, what gives? Used to feel so much easier. Another one is about struggling to innovate as you grow, right? So in the beginning, it was so much about fresh new ideas, and that was key, right? To actually trying to bring disruption to your industry. And then the bigger the organization gets, the more it starts to feel like, are we stagnating? Is this just more of the same? Another one is that there's conflict between teams because they're not aligned on goals and priorities, right? I might be sitting there waiting on something from a different department for my project to move forward. And they're like, well, that's not my priority. And I'm like, well, shoot, this is the most important thing to me. So there's some kind of misalignment there. Our strategic initiatives move so slowly, it feels like they will take forever to accomplish, right? Especially if you have like 17 of them, right? These are our 17 priorities. Doesn't really work so well. Or our leadership has communicated the strategy multiple times, but if you ask our employees, they really couldn't tell you what it means. Another one is that our culture just needs to evolve as fast as our business is evolving. The business is growing. We're doing our best to keep up. Our culture's got to keep up too. Or we want to be better at managing change. I mean, no doubt 2020 is a year that is putting a giant spotlight on our adaptability as humans, as leaders, and as organizations. So these might be some pain points that sound familiar to you. And let me know if you have any others that you're like, well, what about this? Isn't that also culture? Okay, so does culture matter? So there was a study that was done over a period of 11 years. So longitudinal research like that's actually pretty rare. So this is pretty cool. And they really looked at a variety of organizations and they assessed if they had an ineffective culture or an effective culture. And they really compared it against some of these important variables like net income increase, revenue increase, stock price increase, and workforce expansion. So does culture matter? Yes, it matters. If you take a look at these percentages, these are honestly the kinds of percentage differences that are so hard for us to even grasp as humans because the numbers are just so ridiculously big. So even where there might have been revenue growth in an ineffective culture of 166%, compare that to 682% for effective cultures, right? And net income increase, right? So what's our profit like? This is so huge. Anytime leaders are struggling with culture, it's basically this hidden budget line item of waste working at cross purposes. So absolutely, when you pay attention to culture, it has a huge impact on top line, bottom line. And then I'm not going to go through all of these because there are just so many of these statistics, right? But 88% of employees believe that a strong company culture is key to business success. One of our favorite quotes actually comes from Lou Gerstner, who was leading IBM through it's a turnaround, although it's funny because they were already making like in the billions when he came on, but he still took them to this like exponential growth. And he said that in his time, he learned that culture is not just a part of the game, it is the game. It's the whole thing. And so obviously a lot of executives believe the same. Paying attention to company culture when you're hiring is extremely important. Having a very defined business strategy also creates a very positive work culture, right? We want to know what we're doing. We want to feel like we're spending time on things that really matter. Having trust with senior management. So you can see there's a lot of research. And I actually have like 7 or 8 of these slides at the end of this that I just hid and put in the background because I think y'all get the idea. So, but what does an effective culture mean, right? What is that? There's really 3 things that we look at. So a culture is effective when it produces a high level of employee engagement, when it positively impacts the quality of employees' lives, and as evidenced from a couple slides back, is a significant driver of organizational performance and market success. Okay, so that's what makes culture effective. Now we get to the question of, well, what is culture anyway? So I'm going to give you our slightly geeky definition of it, and I'm going to break it down for you. So we define culture as an emergent property of organizations that's created by the interactions of the behaviors and beliefs of the individual employees. So let's take this one step at a time. So I'm going to talk first about this whole idea of emergence. So an emergent property, an example would be the taste of sugar, right? So most of us know what sugar tastes like. Things are getting a little bit better, but they put it in pretty much everything. It's in all of your food. So we know what sugar tastes like. And this is the structural formula of sucrose, right? So it has these different components: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. But the taste of sugar is an emergent property based on the interactions of these elements. So I can't just ask you to lick carbon and lick hydrogen and lick oxygen and then tell me what sugar tastes like, right? That's not how it works. It's how they come together. It's the interaction. In fact, you can take these same elements and you can make gasoline, which is definitely going to taste different. So that's the emergent piece. And this is part of why culture is really tricky, because it feels like it's this sort of nebulous, intangible thing that you can't work directly on. You have to be able to think about it in this sort of emergent property way, but focusing on the components that you actually can control. So back to our definition, the second piece is that we're talking about behaviors and beliefs of the employees, right? That interactive component, the emergence, is what culture is. So behaviors and beliefs of the individual employees. So even though culture is this idea that sounds like it's very organizational in terms of level, and it is, what's so important to notice is that actually the source of our beliefs and behaviors is right here. And so culture actually exists between the ears of the individual employees. So what we want to be able to do is make a really clear connection between some of these organizational level ideas and the individual human beings. This is why it's so tricky. And this is why it's not so simple that, every organization can simply buy culture, right? With a ping pong table or cornhole or pinball or whatever other game you may want to have. And of course, with so many people being virtual now, like I'm not even sure what the equivalent is. Zoom parties, Zoom bingo. So those can be artifacts or components of culture, but obviously it's so much more than just being able to buy one. So, and I'm just gonna pop over. Okay, I don't have any questions coming in yet. Cool, I'll just keep checking. So I wanna switch over now to a story that's a little bit more somber than my goofy ping pong slide, and just share with you. So I mentioned that I worked for NASA when I started my career. And the reason that I worked there is because in 2003, the space shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. And we lost all astronauts on board. And so what happened, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board report found that during the launch, there was a piece of foam that fell off the external tank, which is that big orange structure in the middle, and it actually struck the leading edge of the orbiter's wing. And they had a lot of cameras pointing at the launch, but they still couldn't tell exactly where the foam hit. And of course, it was one of many anomalies throughout the course of the mission, and they analyzed it and they assessed it. And there were people that were raising the red flag and said, hey, I'm really concerned about this. And for a variety of reasons, a number of reasons, they decided to go ahead and give Columbia the green light to come back. And obviously, in hindsight, they could see that that was a really flawed decision. So the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, or CABE, report captured that the culture of NASA was actually as much to blame for the accident as the piece of foam itself. And so I was hired and brought in to work with my now business partner to really focus on what were those components of culture that led to this happening. And it's especially tricky and challenging and strange because NASA was seen as such a great place to work. And it's obviously comprised of some of the smartest people in the world. So how can this happen? And it really gets at the complexities of culture. And so I'm going to share with you this model where we really try to simplify it. This is something we've been putting together for about 15 years. And just so you have some context, this is what happens when you put a psychologist together with an engineer and say, okay, go do culture stuff, right? So that's my business partner. He has a PhD in industrial engineering. My PhD is in industrial and organizational psychology. And so we really look at culture through this comprehensive lens. And we want you to as well. We want you to understand it as best you can so that you can work more directly on the components that matter. So here's our missing link culture model. And as I mentioned, culture is this organizational level idea, right? And so we want to talk about that. Even though every culture is different and unique and we want it to be that way, we believe that every culture that's effective has these 4 qualities: maturity, diversity, community, and unity. But as I was saying before, It's really about being able to connect those things down to the individual human beings, because that's where culture exists. It's between the employees. And so what we want to do is be able to focus then on the individual capacities for growth, for respect, for connection, and for identity. And so the work that we do is really focused on then bringing the missing links, right? And so these are the things to really bring them to light. When we're focused on an individual level on employees' growth in terms of their self-acceptance, self-awareness, and self-accountability, we create maturity. When we focus on individuals' capacity for respect, meaning we welcome different skills, different ideas, and we have inclusion, that's how you really get diversity and the benefits from diversity, right? Not like check the box diversity, but different ideas where we're truly listening and bringing out that innovation and creativity that emerges when people look at the world differently. When you want to create that sense of community, it's about our individual capacities for connection. And so we do that through compassion, trust, and openness. And openness is the piece I'm going to do a deep dive in just a couple minutes. And then the last piece here around unity, really making sure that we feel like we're operating as one. We are rowing in the same direction. I mean, all those cliche metaphors that you hear, right? They mean something for a reason. This is about focusing on the individual's level of identity, right? How much do they feel like they are truly a part of this organization? And this comes through in the missing links of common purpose, common beliefs, and control, right? We want to be able to feel like we are in control of what's happening in the organization. That's how we drive it forward. And then, of course, leadership is what holds the whole model together. So that's the missing link model. And that's really highlighting these pieces that you find in the middle of these strands. That's what's so important to actually bring down to the individual level. And then you get those attributes that really emerge. So a simpler way for us to look at this, I'm just going to pop over one more time and see if there's any questions in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions yet. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat at any point. So here is a slightly simplified, this is actually a different model, but it captures a lot of similarity, right? So this is our inside out model. And you can probably see how, based on the missing link culture model, if we talk about organizational culture, we have to start with self. And so I want to break this out. If we were to take that maturity strand that I spoke about, this is the individual capacity for growth. These were those three components. This is our self model. So this is self-acceptance, self-awareness, and self-accountability. And so these are really, really core ingredients in terms of our ability to have openness as we think about it. So I'm going to talk about what that means to be open. And I want to do that in a way where I'm linking it back for you to these components. So self-acceptance means I am okay with me exactly as I am. I'm okay with my flaws and my imperfections. And because I am okay with my flaws and imperfections, I allow myself to see my flaws and imperfections, which is that self-awareness. I allow myself to know that because I'm not going to beat myself up for it. It's not going to be extremely painful for me to see the ways in which I'm struggling or failing or have a momentary weakness or whatever it is. So self-acceptance actually accelerates your self-awareness. And then as you become more self-aware, you start to understand more and more how you're actually creating every single situation that you're in, right? Every situation that you are in, you are co-creating, you are contributing to it. And in some ways, you feel totally clear about that and you understand how you're contributing. And other ways, you're not so sure, right? So we want to keep focusing on building that self-awareness. And then once you have that self-awareness, then it's so much easier to be self-accountable. If I can see how I'm actually making choices to contribute to my environment or to contribute to struggling in a relationship with my boss or with my employee or with a client, when I can see that, then I can be more self-accountable, which means that I am very empowered. When I'm self-accountable, I see that, oh yeah, there are all kinds of levers here that I can pull and move that will actually shift what's happening either around me or within me. And that's incredibly powerful. And when I talk to leaders, every single leader I ever speak to about this wants to have a team filled with self-accountable individuals. You know who these people are. These are the kind of people where if you call them out on a mistake or you go, hey, what's up with this? They're the people that are not defensive. They are the people that accept responsibility. They are the people that say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, let me figure that out and understand. I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to get right on that. And when they say that, you believe them, right? It doesn't just feel like lip service. And so we really want to be able to create this self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-accountability. Now, fortunately, it's on a spectrum. So we talk about this as really being this emergent property of maturity. And I'm grateful that it's not just a binary like mature or immature, because I still catch myself with all kinds of immature moments. We all do. It's part of being human. And that's that self-acceptance piece, by the way. So this self piece, this becomes really critically important for what I'm about to go into, which is this whole idea of openness. So if you remember, openness is a key part of our community strand. So this is about, do we have the kind of environment in this culture, in this organization, where it feels like we look out for each other? Have we created high levels of trust? Have we created the kind of environment where I actually don't feel like I have to watch my back because y'all got me? That's what we're talking about. And so openness is one of the key ways to create that sense of community, to have that capacity for connection. All right, I'll get to it. I'm finally going to get to it. Openness. What does this mean? Here's the first part. This represents my experience. And I'm going to do this whole thing using I language, meaning I'm going to speak about it like it's me. I am talking about me. My self-awareness means that I'm not going to say you if I mean me. So we highly encourage you to use I language as well. Instead of saying like, oh, when you're sitting in a meeting and you give your input, like you want to feel like it matters what you're saying. If I say that, who am I actually talking about? Most likely I'm talking about me. So my experience is, at least in part, owning that and saying, when I'm sitting in a meeting and I offer up my opinion, I want to feel like it matters. I want to feel like it matters that I'm spending my time there. And you can notice even how the tone shifts. Like it actually feels more open, it feels more vulnerable, because I'm speaking about my experience. So more broadly, my experiences, my thoughts, my feelings, my beliefs, my sensations, my memories, my intentions, all of that. And that's the only thing that I can ever be open about. I can never be open about anybody else's experience. That's for them to do, right? And of course, I can invite them to do that with me. So openness starts actually with my experience. Now, here's the first challenge. I mentioned self-awareness. So of my total experience, I'm aware of some of that. And there's a lot of it that I'm not so much aware of. This is why self-awareness is so critical. And the first piece of openness is actually being open with yourself, allowing yourself to fully know your own experience. And I'll come back to that in a moment and give you an example. So openness is actually self-awareness plus self-disclosure. So now that I have awareness of at least some of my thoughts, feelings, beliefs, whatever it is, maybe all I notice is like my heart's racing right now because this is a hard conversation. That could be something that I actually choose to share, by the way. So once I'm aware, let's look at our choices. So we're talking about self-accountability now. What are my choices? Well, one choice is that I can withhold what I'm actually thinking, feeling. I can withhold elements of my experience from you. I just won't tell you. So there could be a number of reasons why we do this. So the first one's kind of my favorite because it's a little bit sassy, right? Which is sort of like I've got thoughts and feelings, but I'm not telling you. And we all have that sometimes. We all have that sort of like, you don't get to know what I'm thinking or feeling. And it's like, well, when you snapped at me last week in that meeting, yep, you lost the right to know how I feel about what you're doing or whatever. And withholding can also be something that we do out of a place of benevolence. Often we withhold because, I would say something, I just really don't want to hurt his feelings. Or it could be through a desire to be pragmatic. I would say something if I thought it would make any difference, but I don't think it will. So withhold. Boop. So we have a lot of reasons that we tell ourselves for why we withhold. I'm going to advocate that this is almost never your most effective strategy here. And it's actually, by definition, not open. So that's one choice. Here's another choice. I can just tell you, right? This feels like the simplest, maybe. My thoughts and feelings, I can just tell you what I'm thinking and feeling. I can tell you my intentions. I can tell you what's going on for me. Okay, so we call this green line openness, or honesty as it's labeled there. And you would probably think, well, that's it, right? If I'm aware of something, then I can tell you or I cannot tell you. But we do this crazy thing as humans. We do this really weird, goofy thing. And as soon as you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. We have this squiggly line BS that we like to do. And we're not being fully open. We're saying something, but we're definitely not being clear. And we have a lot of different words for this line, a whole bunch of different words. I'm just going to put a few up there. If we were, live in person, I'd be like drawing us on a flip chart or whiteboard, and I'd be like getting all the great words, because I've had audiences give me such powerful words to really capture the squiggly line thing. So distorting, here's the harshest word. You ready? Lying. Straight up lying, right? This is actually squiggly line. So I have an awareness of my thoughts and feelings, but I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to fully withhold. I'm just going to lie. And again, maybe I'm doing that from a place of benevolence. Maybe I think I'm doing that because I think that's the best strategy. Maybe I'm doing that because I'm trying to be super manipulative. I don't know. You get to assess that for yourself. But even if you think you're doing it from a good place, I'm again going to advocate for this is never the most effective strategy to squiggly line. All right, here's some other words. Misleading, spin, white lies, right? So we're looking now at 3 different choices. So obviously, so far, you could probably feel that I'm really advocating for green line. And one of the reasons why I think that's so important is that even when you think you're doing such a great job with your withholding or like your strategic squiggly line stuff, even when you think you're like, I'm crushing it, like they have no idea what I really think, right? Or from a good place. When that's what's happening, that's not the only way that communication is occurring. And there's all kinds of different research out there. So depending on how you look at it, there's different numbers. But if I was to even ask you in your mind, if I say something and then there's also nonverbals attached to that, let's imagine that they don't really match. Sort of like, honey, are you sure you're okay? I'm fine. Right? Are you more likely to believe my words if I'm fine? Or are you more likely to believe the tone, which is very not actually okay, right? So, and research shows that when there's a mismatch, when what we're saying doesn't seem to align with everything else, which is represented here with these 2 sets of dotted orange lines, 93% of what we pick up on actually is this dotted orange line, the body language, the tone, and we also include in there slips, which are those moments where, under stress or pressure, for example, something that you've been doing such a great job at withholding suddenly like, whoop, like pops out. And it's that moment where you're like, oh man, can I just like bring that back in, right? So we include slips over there. So yeah, that's 93% of what we get, which honestly makes me kind of curious about the other 7%. So, honey, are you okay? I'm fine. Like, what's the 7%? They're like, okay, she's fine, right? Like, who believes that? I don't know. But I could see it happening, especially if I'm not being quite so dramatic in my delivery. It might be more subtle, like, oh, fine. Anyway, hopefully you get the idea there. So I want to highlight why there are 2 different sets of these dotted orange lines coming from my experience to the metaphorical you here. One of those lines is coming from my awareness, and the other is coming from my unawareness. So probably in my goofy example of, are you okay? I'm fine. Probably I'm aware that I'm not actually fine. I'm aware that I have a tone. I'm aware of some of these emotions, right? That I'm sort of trying to hide, maybe not. And sometimes body language and tone are actually kind of oozing out of us without us really being aware. So there's an example where this happened for me a few years ago. And I was in a meeting and I was asking a question. And I believed I was asking a question from a very genuine place. And this woman interrupted me, and I wasn't even directing my question to her, but she interrupted me and she said, "Are you angry?" And I said, "No, I'm confused." And she said, "Oh, is that your word for angry?" At which point I was like, okay, well, now I'm kind of starting to feel a little mad, actually. But I was like, whoa. And it totally derailed where I was going. I stopped the question and I went like super internal, like, what was that? And what is happening? Right. Because now I am feeling something happen. And I think it was about 45 minutes of like really going in and being like, what? And so what was happening for me is that I was really focusing on this unawareness and trying to move it into my awareness. She asked me if I was angry. Am I angry? I don't think I'm angry. Might I be angry? What would I be angry about? I mean, this is kind of annoying. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm annoyed by that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm kind of pissed. And so I got there and I was able to figure it out. And if you're curious, the thing that was angering me is that the person to whom I was directing the question was making what I experienced as passive aggressive comments about a mentor of mine. So somebody who I feel like I have learned so much from. And I was really taking it personally when he was making these comments. And so when I was asking what I thought on the surface were these clarifying questions to really kind of push back actually on some of the comments he was making that included my mentor, what I was not fully aware of is actually how deeply personally I was taking that. And so there was this sort of anger that was oozing out of me that I didn't even realize was happening. And so if you think about that in the context of any kind of organization, if that's happening, if I'm not fully aware of my own tone, I'm not even fully aware of my own emotions, I can't actually do green line. I can't be more open with you. I can only be as open with you as whatever I know. And it was actually a huge service to me that she called me out in that way. And she created that opportunity for me to understand like, oh yeah, I am pissed. And I went directly to that person then, and I did practice my green line openness. And it was a really productive conversation. So I'm going to pop over. Okay, I don't think I see any questions in here just yet. So if you have any questions at any point, I'll just keep kind of checking in on the chat and let me know. All right, so this green line. Now, some of you might be going, yeah, okay. But like, I can't just tell everybody what I'm thinking all the time, right? Because they're going to just think I'm a jerk. Okay. All right. Well, so let's talk, right? If that's what you think, that means you've got some very kind of guarded, defensive thoughts in your mind, which is human, happens to all of us. And there's something underneath that. But if that's your mentality, then you'll find this other choice useful, right? Which is the red line. So this is in contrast to the green line. Green line openness means I'm self-aware and I am self-accountable. I am sharing with you something that is my experience. This is how I feel. I'm not coming to you with this is a good, bad thing, right, wrong. I'm expressing something about what I'm feeling, and perhaps I'm expressing something about what I want. And it's a beautiful entry point for you to actually share more of your awareness with me, and we get to co-create together. Red line means that I'm actually defensive, and I don't even realize that I'm defensive. If you're like, well, they're going to think I'm a jerk, or, well, I've gotten in trouble before when I take the green line, very, very good chance that actually what you did was take the red line. So if you're like, hey, I'm just being honest, someone's got to do it. Okay. That's probably your own defensiveness coming out. That probably means that you could focus on growing your self-awareness and increase your self-accountability in your communication. And you will then find the green line instead of the red line. Now, many people are so afraid of this red line that they actually choose another option altogether, which is, I have some kind of issue with you or something feels difficult, right, between us. And I'm not going to talk to you about it. And perhaps I'm going to withhold, or maybe I'm going to squiggly line or do something like that. But then what I go and do is I talk to somebody else about it. Now, we call this triangulation. And you can see how that could make sense because we're really looking at here to here, and then that would make that triangle. So triangulation is one of the most toxic things that can happen in a company culture. And if you've ever, and I'm sure you have, if you've ever been talked about, I'm sure it didn't feel good. I know it's happened for me, and it doesn't feel good. And typically my reaction to that is, well, why didn't they just come to me directly? And my self-awareness and self-accountability can help me out there. And I can go, well, maybe there's some ways that I'm contributing to that. There's some ways I'm contributing to that I'm not fully aware of. And so this is happening and I want to change it. Or maybe this person is not coming to me directly purely because they come in with a lot of baggage. Maybe they came from a place where if they tried to use green line openness with an employee or with a boss or with a peer, it went really badly for them. And so they told themselves, that's not a choice I'm going to make anymore. But because we're so human, it's so hard for us to not talk about it. And so most of us will actually go find somebody else. And then instead of talking to the person, we're talking about the person. And even this is sometimes done through a lens of intended benevolence. Like I might tell myself, well, I'm going to go have this meeting with Dan. And I don't know Dan very well, but Susie knows him really well. So I'm going to go talk to Susie. I'm just going to see what I can learn from Susie about Dan. And then when I go talk to Dan, I think it's going to go so much better. Right? You're probably like, yeah, am I not supposed to do that? So yeah, I'm going to challenge it. If that's something that you do and something that you think is an effective practice, I want to challenge it. Part of the reason why this is not the most effective route is when I go to Susie to ask her about Dan, I'm not actually learning about Dan. What am I learning about? I'm learning about Susie's experience of Dan, right? And Susie might behave in a way that elicits different behavior from Dan than I would. Susie has her own filters, her own biases. She has her own stuff. And I know you've experienced this before. Like you've heard about somebody before you ever meet them. And you're kind of like, oh God, we'll see how this goes. And then you meet them and you're like, what? I thought they were great. And you came in with this bias against them, which as humans, we love our confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means that we look for information that confirms the things that we think we already know, and we discount or dismiss the things that feel contrary to the things that we think we know. And our brain likes to do that because it likes to be right. It likes to know stuff. We get a little dopamine burst every time we think we're right about something. And so it's also very toxic in that whatever Susie might share with me about Dan is going to shape how I am thinking about him coming into the conversation, which probably means it's going to impact my behavior with him and what I say to him and how I say things to him. And I might actually manifest the very thing that Susie was like, well, watch out for this, right? So it becomes actually very, very dysfunctional. Plus, if you go back to how I really started this whole example, I said, well, I don't really know Dan very well, but Susie knows Dan really well. I'll go ask Susie. Well, okay, what's a simpler solution? If I don't feel like I know Dan very well, how about I go get to know Dan? It's the most green line thing I could possibly do, right? And so this is where part of my experience becomes really important to share. And I can just say, hey, Dan, I'm really interested in getting to know you. I think as we work together, the better we understand one another, the easier it's going to be for us to communicate and collaborate and all that. Tell me more about you. Or maybe I have specific questions, right? And we can actually design this together. We can co-create together. In the same way, I don't want him to make assumptions about me. I'm sure he wouldn't want me to make assumptions about him. So triangulation is another choice people make. They make it far more than I wish they would. I acknowledge I still do it sometimes too. And I have become so much better at this green line communication, going directly to the person and expressing with self-awareness and self-accountability. Here's what I'm thinking and feeling, and then opening that door for them to tell me the same. All right. So let me see. Lisa had said, great point. And Kelly said, that's a good point because that can affect your perception of someone before talking to them. Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. I'm going to keep an eye. Let me know if you have questions, bring them in. So I'm going to get to the next level of this. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this idea of openness. We're going to talk about levels of openness. And so you'll see how this really aligns with what we just talked about. So -1 means I am not aware. I am not self-aware. So I'm suffering from self-deception. Spoiler alert, that's true for all of us as humans. And you can do things to be less self-deceived and more self-aware, right? That's always the goal. It's a journey. Literally have that tattooed. I know I might be small because I'm sharing my screen, but self-awareness, self-acceptance, these things are all journeys that we are on forever, at least if you want to be. So at -1, I'm not even aware. At 0, I'm withholding. And again, could be benevolent in nature, could be kind of sassy, but I'm not telling you what I think and feel. Now, the next few are that red line, right? So this is where it's like, oh, I get in trouble, or hey, it's just brutal honesty, or people don't like it when I tell them what I think. Okay, that's all this red line stuff. So level 1 is you are, right? And so let me go through another example here. Let's do kind of a combination here of these levels of openness and triangulation. Let's say I'm so mad at Bob, right? And I'm like, Bob is a jerk. And I'm not talking to Bob directly, right? I'm talking to you about it because, triangulation. It's like 4 times as common. I can't remember if I said that, but it's really, really common for us to talk about somebody rather than to them, especially when it's difficult like this. So I say Bob's a jerk. Now, you could say a variety of things. You might be like, I know, right? I'm so validated now. I feel so much better knowing that my experience is not just my experience, because I couldn't just trust my experience. You think he's a jerk too? Cool. I feel better about that, right? Or I'm like, man, Bob is a jerk. And you're like, really? I like Bob. I'm like, okay, so I have a couple ways I can respond. I can be like, no, he's a jerk, right? And I can be like adamant, he's a jerk. You shouldn't like him either. You probably had those types of conversations, right? Where somebody is not just like, to each their own, but they're trying to actually convince you that you shouldn't like somebody. Or if you're like, really, I like Bob, maybe I'm like, oh, well, I think he's a jerk. Oh, okay. I'm actually slightly more open there because I'm slightly more self-accountable, because what I'm doing in that moment is I'm acknowledging, well, that's my experience of him. I am letting you have your experience of him. I'm letting that be different. And so level 2, I know we don't really talk like this toward you, I feel, but this level 2 openness is really, okay, well, this is how I feel. This could also be, instead of Bob's a jerk, I'm mad at Bob, right? That's another, it's openness. So I'm owning that that's my feeling. And it's still red, because this is definitely not the most effective way to start these kinds of really difficult conversations. Now, level 3 openness is because you or because he, right? So talking about Bob, I'm like, he's a jerk. You're like, really, I like Bob. And I'm like, well, I think he's a jerk. And you're like, why? What happened? Okay. Level 3 is where we start to get to something that's more functional, right? Because theoretically, I'm going to actually share with you what happened. And I'm like, well, he has not responded to my email in like 2 weeks, right? That's why I'm like so mad. Okay. Again, number of things that can happen here. Maybe this example, by the way, worked so much better before COVID. Maybe you're like, oh, actually, did you know Bob's on a cruise? Yeah, he's like out of touch completely. Maybe he didn't turn his autoresponder on, but yeah, he's out. He's not responding to anybody. Okay. So I might still feel frustrated because I'm not getting the information that I want from whatever email I sent. But maybe I don't think Bob's a jerk anymore, right? Maybe now it's a different story. Either I'm still critical of him and I'm like, well, he should have done his autoresponder, right? Or I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I guess I don't have to freak out and take it personally. One option. Another option, right, just to kind of go in a different direction, is that it could actually be that I say, he hasn't responded to my email in 2 weeks. And you go, yeah, well, Bob's wife is actually in hospice right now. So he's been out. He's not, I don't think he's responding to anybody, right? And in that moment, you can bet that my feelings toward Bob are going to shift pretty dramatically. And yet, once again, it's the same situation where I'm still missing whatever information it was that I was seeking in that email, but I feel so differently about it, which is really that signal for level 4 openness, which I'll get to in just a minute, because I know some of you are like, okay, but what about, so what if, I'm like, he hasn't responded to my email in 2 weeks. And you're like, really? That's weird. He just answered mine like 5 minutes ago. And I'm like, I knew it. He's a jerk, right? That might happen too. So the thing to really notice and pay attention to, and level 4 openness, which turns green, this is where we get to focus on, what is the story that I'm telling myself about what this means? And specifically, what do I make up in my head that you must feel towards me that you would dare treat me this way, right? And I'm a little bit hyperbolic with my language there because I have a flair for the dramatic. It's just how I roll. But this is useful, right? Like, what is it that I imagine you feel? So this is where I get to grow my self-awareness. What is that story? Do I imagine that Bob's ignoring my email because he feels like the email's not important? Which, translation, I fear that it means he thinks I'm not important, right? Not just the email or not just the project, but me. Or maybe I have a different story in my head. Maybe I think that he's ignoring my email because he doesn't like me, right? He doesn't like me because of that thing that happened 2 months ago or whatever. What's the story in my head? Or maybe I imagine that he's ignoring me because he thinks I'm terrible at my job and he doesn't want to waste his time with it. right? So maybe it's, I imagine you feel I am incompetent. So this is pretty vulnerable. You get to this level 4 openness, you're getting to the story in your head. And this story in your head, this is what you're reacting to. This is the only thing that you are reacting to. You are never actually responding to the world around you. You're never actually responding to the human beings that are standing in front of you or typing at you or whatever it is. You are only ever responding to the story in your head. You're responding to the meaning that you are putting on it. And you actually get to choose that meaning once you become aware of it, right? So that self-accountability is that choice. And the self-awareness, of course, is critical. You have to let yourself know that story to own that story and write the ending. And then the other piece that I want to emphasize here is there's a level 5. Let's say that I start to go around and I'm like, okay, I really want to practice green line openness more. I'm not going to tell you like, go do this every day, all day, or you fail. Like, no, that's perfectionism and it's toxic and it's shame-based. My invitation to you would be, see what you can do to be a little bit more open and see how it goes. Typically what you'll find is that people take it as an invitation to be more open with you as well. And we're not talking about openness where it's mean thoughts or brutal honesty. We're talking about openness where we're just being more real with one another. So as you're going around and you're practicing this, let's say that I notice, I'm like, man, I'm kind of constantly telling myself the story when I get kind of worked up, like, and I feel like I want to avoid the conversation because in my head, like they just suck and I can't tell them that. Oh, maybe it keeps coming back to this like insignificance thing, right? They think that my email doesn't matter. They think my project doesn't matter. They think my time doesn't matter. So if I notice a pattern, then I want to look at my level 5 openness, which is that deepest level of openness and self-awareness, which is maybe it's really that I fear I am insignificant. And that's why I keep assigning this meaning to all of these things that are going on. And this is where doing that deeper level of self-awareness work in the maturity strand of that model becomes so important. Because if every single person has a deeper understanding of what is triggering them and what gets them all worked up, and they're able to shift that and get past a lot of that distortion in their own mind, then we can have those conversations with different ideas from people with different skill sets. We can include people and we don't feel threatened by it, right? It becomes easier to have all the hard conversations. And then you're getting to that level of, I can connect with you because I'm telling you what's true for me and you're telling me what's true for you. That's how we can ultimately create that emergent property of community. All right. I'm going to pop over one more time, see if there's questions. Okay, I don't see any more questions yet. So if you have any questions, pop them in. I'll keep checking. All right, so I want to give you one more tool because are you like, all right, so the green line openness, I'm supposed to kind of go around and just tell everybody what I'm afraid of all the time and maybe reflect. And am I supposed to be like, hey, I have some, daddy issues. He didn't give me a lot of attention. So I fear I'm insignificant. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, no, that's not what it has to be at all. Although I have had clients that actually say to each other things that are not that different from that. I had 2 men in a conversation where one of them said, oh my God, I just figured out every time you and I are like arguing, I feel like I'm 16 years old again fighting with my dad. Like, whoa, all right. Now, granted, we were getting pretty deep into the self-awareness work. We'd created that psychological safety for that kind of conversation to happen. And you can create that in cultures. You can get to know each other on a level deep enough where nobody's consumed with that kind of fear or shame. We can actually just be open about it. And I'm also very much a pragmatist, right? So no, I'm not saying that you need to walk around constantly just telling people what you're afraid of all the time, and that's green line openness. So I want to give you another tool that is an example of green line. All right, and it's frick. So if you think it's fun, because I think it's fun, because I'm kind of a nerd, if you didn't already figure that out, is we'll actually say to our clients, like, yeah, frick it out. Just frick it out. Have this conversation. So it's an acronym. And the F is for the fear or the feeling. So it's useful to start with this. It could actually be that level 4 openness that you just got to, right? I could start with that. I could say, hey, like I noticed this fear that you actually are questioning my ability to do this job well. Maybe that's what I would start with if I feel like my boss is micromanaging me. Or it could be that I'm talking about a fear or a feeling that I have regarding a situation. Like, hey, I noticed that I have a fear that we might lose this client. if we're not able to make a really, really powerful shift in how we're delivering services, right? So highlight whatever that fear or feeling is. And this is because the dotted orange lines that I taught a moment ago, it's going to be oozing out of you, right? It's better to call it out. It's better to actually acknowledge your emotion. Plus, name it to tame it. If you can name what you're actually feeling, it immediately decreases the intensity of that. And partly it's because it's bringing you back into that prefrontal cortex. We like to think of ourselves as these logical creatures, human beings, right, that are occasionally emotional. No. We are extremely emotional creatures who are sometimes logical. All right, so start with the fear or the feeling, right? Just be open. And there's usually an element of vulnerability there, right? This is a self-accountable statement. Then you get to the R. This is a request. So your request, you want it to be specific and you want it to be affirmative. So ask for what you do want and not what you don't. Ask for what you would like from that person. Now, it's a request. It's not a demand. It's not a command and control thing. They might say no. Doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. You can keep it going. But figure out what you actually want from the person. In this conversation, what are you asking for? And by the way, it's okay to say, hey, what I would like is for us to have a conversation so that I can think this through with you because I'm not quite sure yet what I want. That's also a legitimate request. Okay, so ask for what you do want. Now, we move into the I, which is inquiry or invitation. And so in this phase, you are inviting them to now be open with you too. So let's go with that triangulation example, right? Like, let's say I learn that you're triangulating about me and I say, hey, so I have this fear that maybe you don't like me or you have a hard time being open with me because I heard that you were talking to Sarah. And I want to request that if something happens with us and you don't like it, that you come to me. I'd really like to be able to talk it out with you. Here's the I. Is there anything that I can do that would make it easier for you to talk to me directly? Right? Because in this moment, perhaps I'm not fully self-aware. Probably I'm not self-aware. And so I'm inviting this person to actually share their green line truth with me. Maybe what I find out is that like 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, they felt like I kind of snapped at them when they offered me feedback. And they took that as like, okay, well, I don't think she wants that from me. Or, okay, I don't think we have trust here. And so after that point, she decided she wasn't going to give me direct feedback anymore, but she was still talking about it because we're human and that's what we do. That can be useful for me, right? So I can hear that from her. And then we can move towards a commitment. And so this conversation does not end until 1 or 2 people or more have made a commitment. Sometimes we talk about these things and it's sort of like you're talking about what you don't like and I'm kind of talking about what I don't like and it feels sort of weird and we're kind of withholding and there's squiggly lining and there's and then nothing changes. There's no commitment. A week later, you do the same thing. I'm pissed off again. I'm like, well, I tried talking to her. Like, what's the point? Right. Well, was there any kind of commitment made? And say it out loud because something else I'll sneak in here. This is a good opportunity to really feel out listening. If I make a commitment and you're like, wait, what do you think I'm asking for? If my commitment's way off base, then I'm probably not listening to you very well. If my commitment is on point, then you're like, yep, cool. She heard me. This feels good. So this is the kind of thing that you can use. It's very green line communication. All right. So I know we only have a few minutes. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat for me and I will do my best to answer them. And I also just want to let you know, if you're curious, if you're interested and you want to follow up for yourself, we have this missing link culture assessment. It's going to take you like 5 minutes or less to fill it out if you'd like to. And it's going to be based off of those elements, the maturity, diversity, community, and unity. So if you want to do that, and I'll send you a report so you can just kind of get a feel for like, yeah, how do I think maybe my culture is doing right now? And so you can check that out. And that's an email where you can reach me. It's hello@gallaheredge.com, or you can do laura@gallaheredge.com. And I am just monitoring to see if there are any questions. Anybody's thinking about it. Thank you, Lisa. And I will just reiterate, I don't want anybody trying to lean into perfection here. If you walk away from this and go, all right, what's at least one situation, one person where I want to practice more green line openness, then I'll feel like that's a win. Try it out. It's almost never as scary as we think it's going to be. Our brains are very fear-driven. Our brains like to think about what's the worst case scenario. They try to imagine, they think they're keeping us safe. They try to imagine how horribly something could go. And so when you actually do it, it's like, wow, not only was that not as bad as I thought, but it was actually kind of awesome because I feel so much more connected with this person now. And now it's going to feel a lot easier for us to have these conversations. Any more questions, let me know. I'm going to throw out one more tip since I have just a couple more minutes. Thank you, Anne. There's one more tip that can help you do green line, which is called first truth first. So first truth first means at the first hesitation of like, do I want to say this? I don't think I want to say this. Oh, why? What is that? That's my first truth. Maybe I'm hesitant to practice green line openness with you because I'm afraid that you will shut down, or I'm afraid that you'll disengage, or I'm afraid that you'll get mad at me, or I'm afraid that you'll cry, or whatever it is. That can actually be the first truth that I share. But here's the most important thing. That's the most important conversation to have. Don't even have the conversation about whatever it is. You want to be able to have that conversation first. It says, hey, I notice that sometimes I'm hesitant to tell you what I'm really thinking and feeling. And I'm a little concerned that that might negatively impact our ability to work together. Can we talk through what that might look like? And so you're really going up a level. I also call this going meta. So first truth first means that's the important conversation to have. Getting to a place where you actually feel like it's easier for you to just be open with that person. Figure out how you can design that together. Be very, very helpful to get the ball rolling. Okay, it's 3:58. And Lisa says talking is always better than the fear rabbit hole. Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes green line is like, hey, I really want to talk this out with you. I notice my thoughts are very messy right now, or I notice that I'm really angry right now, and I don't think this conversation will be most effective while I feel like this. I want to calm down. Can you give me 5 minutes, or can we talk tomorrow, or whatever it is? That's actually my green line truth. I can say that. I don't have to like push through the conversation if I'm super worked up, right? And I can't even figure out what my level 4, level 5 openness is. I can tell you like, this conversation is really important to me. And I feel very like unclear right now. I want to have this conversation later. Let's circle back soon. That's an example of green line. So it is like whatever it is that you're thinking and feeling can be the thing that you share. It's like almost painfully simple when you really get into it. All right. So 4 o'clock. So thank you all for coming. Please reach out if you have any questions. And I hope you are enjoying Digital Orlando. And thank you so much, David, for having me here as a speaker. Bye, everybody.